Hello! If we had the pleasure of meeting last week during the Profi Talk event, then feel free to skip this video. Otherwise, welcome. My name is Megan McAllister. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the instructor for this course. I thought I'd make this video just to introduce myself as a person, how I ended up here, why I'm passionate about biomechanics, just so you sort of have a sense of who you're learning from. So I'll quickly talk about myself as a sports enthusiast, as a kinesiologist, as a researcher, and as a teacher. So I grew up playing hockey. I started when I was about 6 years old, and it quickly became a pretty big part of my life. I was on the ice almost every day, and I absolutely loved it. And then in August, just before starting grade 12, I was in tryouts, and before I knew it, my life would change forever. I suffered a pretty big open ice hit, and I actually broke my L5 vertebrae, which is this bone in your lower back here. And to fix that break, I actually had to have a surgery where they would attach this broken vertebrae to the one above it and the one below it just to keep it in place. And then this is me 24 hours after surgery, just super excited to be sitting up again. But after that surgery, it took months before I could walk again and live a somewhat normal life. And so during that time, I had so many questions like, how is it possible for me to break a bone in my back by being hit on the ice? Why can't I bend my back anymore? Why is it taking so long to recover? And obviously, when will I play hockey again? All of these questions really led me to realize that I was really interested in how the human body works. So I decided that an undergrad degree in kinesiology made sense. So off I went to the University of Ottawa. After completing my Bachelor of Science in Kinesiology, I wrote the exam to become a registered kinesiologist, and that's through the College of Kinesiologists of Ontario. And so now that I was a registered kinesiologist, or an RKIN for short, I started working with this company called CBI to deliver ergonomic assessments to employees, all sorts of employees of the federal government. And so basically, I would go into these different workstations and I'd make sure that the equipment was adjusted properly for the employee. If the employee had any sort of pain or discomfort, then I'd sometimes recommend new or different equipment just to better suit their needs. Now, I also worked as a kinesiologist at Hydrathletics, and that's a clinic here in Kingston that has these really cool underwater treadmills and these smaller pools that are designed for what's called aquatic therapy. And this is really neat because you would get people exercising in the water that could barely walk on land. So because the water removes almost 80% of your body weight, you're able to move a lot more underwater without having to fight against gravity. So those are clearly two very different jobs, but I was qualified to do both with my degree in kinesiology. Okay, so that was me as a sports enthusiast turned kinesiologist. Now I'd like to briefly talk about me as a researcher. During my master's degree, I conducted this neat research where I focused on the symmetry between the left and the right legs when people performed with parallel squat. So you can imagine that you kind of have to move your legs the same way if you want to squat properly. It'd be pretty hard to do a parallel squat without bending your right knee while your left knee is bending, for example. But what's interesting is that I found that what you see isn't necessarily what you get. So we'll learn about these terms in this course, but basically what you see at the kinematic level in terms of the joint angles, that's very symmetric, as you'd expect. It looks like people move their left and their right legs symmetrically. But at the kinetic level, so that's the forces that are generated at each joint, those are not so symmetric. And neither is the muscle activity that's actually generating those forces. So we may look like we're moving symmetrically when we're squatting, but what's happening on the inside and what we can't see is not actually symmetric. So there's some sort of link between motor control and what signal our brain is sending, and then the biomechanics part and the actual movement itself. So my current research really builds on this idea of the interaction between motor control and biomechanics, but I'm not looking at the squat anymore. Now I'm looking at people walking. So more traditionally in the biomechanics world that I come from, we might have thought of movement like this. We have the mechanics or the physics of the way that we walk that might be dictated by the shape of our body. And then we often think of energetics as the outcome or the output of the movement and something that we can measure. And what my PhD research really focuses on is demonstrating that instead of thinking of this as this sort of straight input to output system, our energetic cost is instead being sensed by our body and our nervous system. Our brain is constantly optimizing and shaping our movements in response to this energetic cost. And so the sort of philosophy of my research is that energetic cost is not just an outcome of movement, but instead it plays this really important role in continuously shaping how we move. And so to do this research, I use these little robotic devices called exoskeletons, and they're just placed right at the ankle. And then these exos are attached to these motors back here. And that motor basically just sends a signal or a command to the exoskeleton to make walking easier or harder. And so by making walking easier or harder, we're basically changing that energetic cost landscape. So how much energy people need to spend to walk a certain way. And then we can answer questions about this link between motor control and biomechanics. So we're not only looking at the body move, and that would be biomechanics just purely, but my research now is trying to understand how and why we move the way that we do. So incorporating how our brain decides what actions we're taking. Okay, so that's enough about me as a researcher. The last thing is me as a teacher. I had so much fun teaching KNP 153 3 years ago, and I'm extremely excited to be teaching it again this year. But I'm not going to spend any time talking about the course specifics in this video. I'm going to leave that for the next video. So feel free to hop on over to that video now to learn all about the course itself, KNP 153.